Hello darts fans and welcome back to the MODUS Super Series. We are going to have a tungsten talk today about one of the most, I suppose, controversial and bolstering dart players of the last generation, because Gezi Price has definitely had a lot to say about darts over the last 10, 12 years. And Scott Mitchell's joining me for this one. And we're going to go in chronological order, because if we go back to, say, 2013, we were playing pretty much at our height at this point, just before you got the World Championship under your belt. What did you know about Gezi Price, if anything?
I really didn't know a lot about him. I'd heard about this guy that used to be a rugby player in Wales, and he was going to be one to look out for. But at that point, he'd never even been to Q School. He never, you know, they were talking about maybe putting him in the Welsh team and things like that, because I was an international at the time. So early doors, we really knew nothing about him. He came out of the blue, didn't he?
So when he went to Q School in 2014, I think a lot of people understood that he was quite vibrant and very passionate. But in the next few years, we would learn that it was actually Barry Bates, the first person to represent Wales with Mark Webster back in 2010 at the PDC World Cup. It was actually Barry Bates that convinced him to go to Q School.
Yeah, it seems that way. It seems that Barry had obviously run into him or come across him at some place and said, "Hey, you're quite good, boy. You need to get your backside down to Q School." And he obviously listened to Barry's advice, and before you know it, the second day, he's gone through the card, won 6 games, and got his tour card.
And the reason he got the tour card, and one of the reasons why he moved on so quickly, is because he made a somewhat bold decision to take the tour card and move on with darts instead of playing rugby. Now, at this point in time, he's on the verge of turning 40 years of age. But around about then, he was in his late 20s. So at that point, that was quite a bold decision for him, considering how much he loves rugby.
Yeah, massive decision, because obviously, one, he loves rugby, and two, obviously there must have been a certain amount of monetary value to what he was doing, and to throw that away to go blind into what was a darting career that, let's not beat around the bush, has turned out pretty well for him. But at that time, you've got to have some pretty big cojones, you know, to jack one in and go straight into the darts. And there is a lot of outlay initially. If you haven't got the sponsors, it's not something that you just walk into, and there's no sort of finances that you haven't got to pay out. You've got to pay out at the start. So super brave move, but we know him as a very brave dart player on the board and a very positive thinker. So you can kind of understand why he did. 2014,
this is where he comes through Q School. Let's look at what darts was actually like at this point. It was about 12 months before you became world champion in the BDO. This is where Michael van Gerwen had just become world champion for the very first time. Gary Anderson hadn't even won a world title at this point. So he was coming into a PDC system that was just about to get stronger.
Yeah, very much stronger. So you're throwing yourself into sort of the ring of fire, aren't you, really? The big names and the established names were there. And I think when you look back, Gezi must have had some sort of inner belief to believe that he could be competing with those guys. And I don't think he probably ever thought it could have gone that well that early, because, you know, we go through 2014 and 15, and by the time we get to 2016, he's broke the top 32 in the PDC already, which is, when you think about it, it's just absolutely phenomenal, really.
When we consider how people catapult themselves into stardom, into form, into the kind of confidence that would breed a lot of titles, which he eventually would win, we have spoken about Ryan Searle, Johnny Clayton, and Gezi Price because of the Red Dragon Champion of Champions. When he had won that, he really did catapult himself into a different level of confidence darts-wise, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think we both know as dart players that once you find that confidence, that belief in your own game, the game becomes a lot easier. With, you know, when you're playing confident, there's nothing better. You stand there watching your opponent and he hits a 180 and you go, actually, that's not enough. That's when you're right in your pomp and your confidence. When you go to that Red Dragon Champions of Champions, it is that best of three, you've got to be confident. If you come out of that winning that, you must be feeling that your game is at the top of the world.
Moving forward, he would eventually make his way to the match play for a debut, and it was pretty much there where he announced himself to the wider audience, beating Michael Smith at the 2015 match play and then bumping into a certain Adrian Lewis. So it was this game that vaulted him into a lot of people's living rooms, and people were saying, well, who's this guy? He seems really, really confident. And I think the word arrogance at this point was used for the first time, but there's nothing wrong with confidence, is there? Especially when you're beating a two-time world champion like Adrian Lewis.
No, absolutely not. I think that was the one that put him on the TV screens, wasn't it? And we saw his character coming out. We saw that he was very different to lots of other dart players. And we all sort of kind of fell in love with him and wanted him to be beating these top stars. We wanted him to rattle cages. We wanted that excitement about the game, and that's exactly what he brought to the TV. He brought that no-nonsense type of head-to-head from rugby. When you've got an opposite number at rugby, you must not let them dominate you. And he kind of brought that mentality to darts, and it was probably one of the first times we'd seen it in that way since the heyday of Eric Bristow.
So do you think he had people from Welsh backgrounds who were heroes of his in darts, or was he just playing quite organically at the time?
I think he was probably playing organically at the time. I think that he was probably just worrying about himself and how he was progressing in the game. I'm sure that there were friends who have been playing a bit longer advising him. Barry Bates, I'm sure, would have still been in the frame and given him a bit of advice. But I think he came in with the plan of doing it his own way and the way that he felt was right for him to do it. And I think that's a very difficult point to argue. I think he did it the way that he should have done it. 2015,
he makes his match play debut. Within 2 years, he is in a major final, meeting Peter Wright at the UK Open in 2017, who at the time was seen as one of the best players in the world. But I want to talk about a match that he was involved in the quarterfinals, arguably the greatest session of darts that the PDC has ever had. Almost every game in the quarterfinals of the 2017 UK Open went to the very end, 3 10-9s and a 10-8. But one of them involved Ian White against Gezi Price. White missed his chance to take the match, and Price takes out a career-changing 160, and he would vault himself into the final at Minehead. What kind of effect do you think that had on his career?
I think it has a massive effect. When you do something, we all have a saying in darts, special players and special moments. And the special players always do those special moments at the right time. And I think that was the time, that 160 was the time where we went, he's a little bit more than a rugby player turned over to darts. He's a special dart player now. He's doing things in the right moments, in the right time. And once you start doing those and you start believing those, they continue to happen. And I believe you're absolutely spot on. That was a massive turning point in his darting career.
He would actually win on the floor that year as well a couple of times. And one of the reasons why he had a chance to butt heads with Adrian Lewis is that Adrian said that Gezi only won those 2 floor titles that year because not everybody attended. They were actually elsewhere. What did you make of that?
I think there's a lot of banter. There's a lot of peacockery, to coin a phrase of one of our dear friends. Goes on the floor tournaments. I've been into, obviously, having had a tour card, and you do see a little bit of that going on with the top guys walking by one another. And I just think that's just Adrian being Adrian, and that's how confident and flamboyant Adrian was. And when you get 2 characters of a similar ilk, sometimes they're going to butt heads.
You mentioned that confidence breeds confidence, and if you start doing things, it can continue. There are no guarantees of that, but when it comes to Price, that year of making the final of the UK Open, he also makes the final of the World Cup with Mark Webster, who at the time, and still to this day, is one of the best World Cup players that the PDC's ever had. So to have a partner like that to make the final, they would lose to the Netherlands. But how big a step was that?
I think that is a big step, and we know how passionate Gezi is about being Welsh. And some players will put an international shirt on and play in a totally different manner because they feel they're playing as part of a team and representing their country. So Webby was always like that anyway. He was a past world champion. And at that point, you have to say he was probably the experienced one of the two and probably guided the team the way that the team went. So, and I think Gezi would have learnt from that. And I think I have him down as one of the game's learners. And he will take it in on board. Some of it he will discard because it's not relevant to him. But some of it he will keep on board. And I think another turning point was playing for Wales in that World Cup.
Just quickly, one more thing on that World Cup. Was that seen as a baton passing moment between the best Welsh player of that generation to possibly the next one?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, I think you're possibly right. Mainly because of his passion for doing it. If you've got a passionate player in a shirt and it's for his country, then I think you always take a step back and go, wow, this really means something for him. So, I think you're probably right. I'd never looked at it like that.
Interesting stuff to talk about Wales in that regard because it's one of the most important nations that darts has ever had. When it comes to moving forward, we still didn't have a Welsh major champion in the PDC, quite remarkably, since 1994 when things started. But Gezi Price would change that when he would win the 2018 Grand Slam of Darts in a final that nobody will ever forget.
No, exactly. It sort of, we've spoken about a coming of age, and by this time in 2018, he'd been in the PDC for 4 years. I feel you need to be and hold a tour card for 3 years to even grasp what's going on around you, the way you qualify for things and what have you. So by the time we get to 2018, Gezi sort of established himself as one of the top players. He's broken into the top 32 within 2 years. Then he was solid in that top 32. He never looked like he was ever going to drop out of it. So he'd established himself, and it was now the time for him to start winning stuff. And that's exactly what happened in that final. He hung in there, and like you say, once you get your first one, then you know that you can beat all the others every time.
What did you make of that final? Because I think a lot of us watched it live, and we all had our own opinion of what happened on the stage. But what was your initial reaction to what was going on?
Excitement. I think he brought something to the game, whether people feel that it was right or wrong. He brought something to make it very viewable. A little bit of needle doesn't hurt in a game as long as it doesn't go too far over the top. Was that border in it? Who knows? I think that it brought a whole new audience to the game where people thought that, darts, it's an old man's game, this, that, and the other. That showed there was genuine passion and needle between the players, particularly the top ones. And I think a lot of people have seen the game a little bit different from that day on.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But one thing that lives with me to this day and to a lot of people is that if you think about him coming through Q School in 2014, this was in 2018, so it's 4 years later. He said on the walk-on at the Grand Slam to an interviewer at that point that he was still a rugby player stealing a living from dart players. Now, was that just adrenaline or did he really mean that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of gamesmanship. I think it's a little bit of adrenaline, but maybe in his own head he hasn't yet established himself as a top PDC player. Or did he know that he was a top PDC player and he was just reminding everybody else that this isn't the be-all and end-all for me? My head's still in the game of rugby. So, a difficult one to know. But I think, again, that was just a little bit of a mind game and a bit of peacockery, I think.
12 months later, he would actually defend the Grand Slam. And I think a lot of people at that point were saying that he needed to win something else of that note to legitimize that first one. But how impressive was it in the way that he played the following year? Because in my eyes, he played even better than the first one.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you and I have played darts for a long time, and we've won tournaments and gone back to them the following year and realised how difficult they are to refine that focus and form that you had the year before, because you've always been searching for it all year. And that's on a smaller tournament. This is a massive TV major. So to go back and then defend that TV major, that is something that is ultra impressive. And there aren't many players that have done back-to-backs on tournaments and defend things. So he then, by winning the second one, and because he'd already won the same one the year before, it meant a little bit more to the rest of his opponents to be able to defend it. They knew that mentally he was there now with them.
By this time, he was a serial winner, and wherever he went, he was a huge threat. He would end up being someone who would win on the European Tour quite a few times, especially in Riesa, which has become a great place for him. He would end up winning the World Series of Darts finals, the World Grand Prix. Not a great deal of joy at Alexandra Palace, though, because every time he went there, he was confronted by an English crowd. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the way that Gezi had gone down the route of his passion on the board and showing it, it got to the point where when it was new, yeah, people really liked it. People liked to see him ruffling feathers. It was entertainment. But then as it went on, people started to wane and not like it and think, it's about time he stopped it now. So a Welshman then coming to England, and he was quite vocal in his interviews about how he felt about the English, and he didn't really bother and give them too much time of day. So that didn't go in his favour either. So he kind of fueled the fire on a few occasions, which then ultimately saw him having problems with the crowd at Ali Pali.
Moving forward, COVID would hit in 2020, and that obviously was a tragic and a very difficult time for everybody on this planet. But with that came opportunity for people to use the circumstances to the best of their ability. And I think it's fair to say that nobody used those circumstances better than Gezi Price, because he didn't have crowds heckling him. He was able to win the World Cup with Johnny Clayton in Salzburg. And then in early 2021, at Alexandra Palace, a very echoing and eerie place with an incredible walk-on, we will say, because of the walkway, the catwalk that we'd actually put in place in the middle. He was the one who was standing at the end, and it just had to be Gary Anderson in that final, didn't it?
I think it was the final that everybody wanted, and I think you're absolutely right as well. The fact that we were playing behind closed doors, that probably allowed Gezi to establish a head of steam at Ali Pali without the crowd being there, because it had been such a difficult place for him, and it really opened doors for him. He got rid of all those bad memories of being there and making that final, it being Gary Anderson, the antics that had happened a few years before at the Grand Slam. I mean, everybody was glued to it, waiting to see what happened.
It took him a long time to get over the line in that final. It's a good job he had a buffer to work with in that set format match. But ultimately, it would be double five that he would hit. And this after taking a very long walk back down that catwalk towards the Sid Waddell Trophy. And then when he would win it, we would be gifted one of the most precious darting photographs where he's holding onto the trophy with a somewhat celestial light over him. That was one of the most iconic darts moments of the last 10 years for me.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, and we all know what double five feels like to hit anyway and how difficult it is. Would you want double five to be your dart for winning a world championship? No, you'd much rather have a different double where you can really go at it full beans. But look, he got himself in the right state of mind to become the champion. It was like he'd walked away from the hockey, walked up towards the trophy, and just told himself, this is my moment. I don't care what double it is, this is my moment. And he owned the moment rather than let the moment own him, which a lot of players we know are probably taken over by the latter at times, particularly in big tournaments and situations to win. And then, obviously, once he's got one of those world titles on his back, they never go away. They can't take it away from you. You've kind of achieved what your whole goal into going into the game was about. And it's how you go on from there is very difficult.
His legacy is far from finished. Obviously, he's still got plenty of time to write some more. But some of the other things that he's achieved, like 2 9-darters in Belfast, in what is now a very storied and seasoned Premier League career, and moving forward, I'm sure there will be other Premier Leagues that we'll talk about. But what are the other things that stand out for you when it comes to his career, particularly in the last couple of seasons?
In the last couple of seasons, I think we've seen different Gezzies. I think we've seen him fall out of love with the game. He's now been within the game and had a tour card for, well, it's 11 years now. So you have those moments within the game where you get fed up with it. How you react to being fed up with it when you're Gezzy Price is you rebel. You rebel against the system. You rebel against everything because that's his rugby mentality coming out. He's not getting bullied by anybody. It seems now in the last 6 months he's fallen back in love with the game. And I think we're going to see some more good stuff from him in 2025 because he looks to be right on point again.
2 World Cup wins with Johnny Clayton, and we know what kind of form he's in. He's now the Welsh #1, and I know that doesn't sit great with Gezzy Price. But just to finish things up, in my personal opinion, his legacy as it stands right now is someone who doesn't know how to do something but figures it out. He didn't like double start darts. He won the World Grand Prix. He didn't like the World Championship. He ended up winning that and will look to legitimise by winning it in front of a crowd. Do you agree that his legacy at this moment is basically to be finished?
Yes, I think his legacy on the board is to be finished. I agree with that. But I think the legacy from the last 10 years is how many young Welsh dart players are you seeing now between the ages of 18 and 24, sort of now starting to come to the fore within the PDC. And that's all down to Gezzy. That's all down to Gezzy bringing it home to the Welsh people and saying, we can compete with these guys all around the world. We can be the best in the world at this. And we're now seeing an influx of younger players coming through, all walks of darts, not just the PDC, all walks of darts. And I think he's set a legacy that there's a future after him now.
Is his character something that we needed over the last 10 years and continue to need in the future?
Definitely, definitely. Once you sort of left the scene, we needed another bad boy. So, we needed him. Darts needed him desperately. And I think for Gezzy, in his own mindset, he needed darts too.
Well, we thank you for your company, talking about one of the biggest characters that darts has ever had. So, keep it Pluto TV for lots more tungsten talking over the coming times. We thank you for your company. I've been Paul the Asset Nicholson. He's been Scotty Doug Mitchell. And that was Gerwyn Price.